What's up guys, welcome back to Fish the Moment. Today I want to talk to you about my top 3 offshore fishing lures when I'm fishing on dirty water lakes. So let's get into it. Okay, so before we get into the baits, I want to clarify what dirty water means in my mind. And that's any time when the water has less than 2 feet of water visibility. So you can see less than 2 feet into the water. And you can always test that by just taking a bait like this crankbait, sticking it down to the water, and then seeing how far down the water you can see it. And so if your lake is a dirty water lake by that classification, these are the baits for you. Before we jump in this video, I want to call out that the baits I'm about to show you are not the only offshore baits I fish in muddy water. There are a lot of great baits that you can fish offshore in muddy water conditions, and I have probably 10 or 15 I use on a regular basis. However, you don't need to complicate offshore fishing that much, especially when you first start doing it. And if you're trying to fish a lot of different baits while also trying to understand how to fish offshore, how to read your electronics, and how to position your boat, you're going to be overwhelmed and it's going to be really tough for you to actually catch fish offshore. So in this video, I want to talk about my top 3 offshore fishing baits that cover about 75% of my offshore applications and that new offshore anglers can use when they're starting their offshore fishing journey. And so these baits are, again, not the only baits I throw, but they will get the job done most of the time, and they're great baits to choose if you're new to offshore fishing. So just wanted to put that in there. Realized I didn't preface that well enough when I was making the video, so now let's jump right into it. So my number 1 go-to bait when I'm fishing offshore on dirty water lakes is a deep diving crankbait. And this bait puts a ton of big fish in the boat for me offshore, and I've caught some of my biggest bass of my life on this bait. And I fish this bait in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And I'll throw anything from a striking 6XD, a striking series 6, a striking series 5, a 5XD, 10XDs, all kinds of different deep diving crankbaits. And I actually made a complete guide to deep diving crankbaits that I put on my channel a few years ago, and so definitely check out that video if you want to get more in-depth instruction about the types of crankbaits that I use, the colors, the equipment that I use for it, and everything. But I'll just tell you that deep diving crankbaits are the way to go if you're fishing offshore in dirty water. So the reason the deep diving crankbait is my go-to lure when fishing offshore in muddy water is because a deep diving crankbait allows me to cover a lot of water and find active groups of fish that are set up offshore. And my favorite time to fish a deep diving crankbait is when there's some type of current, whether that's man-made current from a dam or wind current when you have a 15 to 20 mile an hour wind blowing across your lake. These conditions will get the fish really active, and normally you can catch multiple fish in a row on a deep diving crankbait when you find an active school. And I actually have a video on my channel that explains some of the different conditions that affect offshore bass, and it's one of my most popular videos, so I would definitely check it out because it'll make you a lot more efficient and effective offshore angler. And whenever I'm fishing offshore with a deep diving crankbait, I focus on places that have contour line changes, whether that's a hump, a point, a ridge, a ledge, or any sort of drop where the bottom goes from shallow water to deep water. And if you don't know what any of those types of structures are, here's a video that will explain what they are and how to find them on a contour line map. So again, the deep diving crankbait is really effective because it allows you to cover lots of water, find those active bass, and it also catches really big bass. And so I've won a lot of tournaments over the years throwing that deep diving crankbait, and if you add this to your arsenal, you're definitely going to start catching a lot more and a lot bigger fish offshore. So if the bass are a little bit less active and aren't biting that deep diving crankbait, my next go-to bait is a football jig. And this is my second biggest confidence bait behind that deep diving crankbait. And again, I catch a ton of big fish on this bait, and it's really good year round. I'll catch them in the summer, in the spring, in the winter, and in the fall on this bait. And so it's very, very versatile. And I'll throw this bait in 2 sizes, either a 1/2 ounce or a 3/4 ounce size. And this is a 3/4 ounce size, and I fish this whenever the water is deeper than 10 feet. And so if I'm fishing deeper than 10 feet of water, I go with a 3/4 ounce football jig. If I'm fishing shallower than 10 feet of water, I'll go with a 1/2 ounce size. And as far as the color goes on this football jig, I always throw it in the green pumpkin color, regardless of water clarity. And I never have any problems, even in the dirtiest water, getting fish to bite this green pumpkin color. And then I'll match this jig with a Strike King Rage Craw. And this is a great trailer, especially in the summertime. It pushes a lot of water, and I'll just match the color of that Rage Craw to that green pumpkin jig, and you're gonna be good to go. And when I'm throwing this football jig, I'm usually throwing it on 15-pound fluorocarbon line, and my preferred fluorocarbon is CR and VizX, and I'll throw it on a 7'4" medium heavy action or heavy action bait casting rod. This is actually a 7'4" heavy, and you really want a long rod with a lot of backbone, and it's pretty heavy action because you're gonna be casting this bait pretty far, it's pretty heavy, and you're gonna wanna have really good hook setting power, especially if you're putting this bait around rocks and brush and trees and stuff like that. A football jig is my next go-to lure when fishing offshore in muddy water because I can normally fish it in a lot of places that I cannot fish the deep diving crankbait, whether that's a super thick brush pile, standing timber, some really thick rocks that may snag my crankbait. And normally when I'm throwing this football jig, I'm fishing it pretty quickly as well. I'm not letting it sit on the bottom for a super long time. I'm normally pulling it pretty quickly, trying to cover water and again, find those active groups of fish. Now that doesn't mean I won't slow down and crawl that football jig on the bottom, but I use that as a last resort. And in general, when I'm fishing offshore, I like to fish quickly, making 5 to 7 casts on an area. And in my mind, if the fish are actively feeding on an offshore spot, you only have to put that bait close to those fish 1 or 2 times and they're gonna eat it. And I fish the football jig on the exact same types of structures I fish the deep diving crankbait, whether that's a point, a ledge, or a hump. And just so you guys know, I'll link all of the baits I'm talking about in this video, along with all of the equipment that I like to throw them on, in the description of this video. And so you can use those links and go straight to tacklewarehouse.com and buy these baits. And so I'll try to make it as easy as possible for you guys to find these baits, get them in your hands, and start catching a bunch of good fish this summer offshore. So my third go-to bait when I'm fishing offshore in muddy water is a shaky head. And this bait will get bit when none of the other lures will. And I'll always fish this when I'm fishing around a lot of other anglers, whether it's in a tournament or just on a Saturday when there's a lot of anglers around. And I'll also fish this bait when the conditions are calm and slick and really sunny and the bass are just really hard to get to bite. And when I'm throwing the shaky head, I'm always throwing a 7-inch zoom trick worm, and I'll throw this in the June bug color. And I'll pair this trick worm with either a 3/16, a 1/4 ounce, or a 3/8 ounce jig head. And I'll throw the 1/4 ounce size when I'm fishing anywhere from 7 to 12 feet of water. I'll throw the 3/8 ounce size when I'm fishing deeper than 12 feet of water. And I'll go down to a 3/16 ounce size when I'm fishing less than 7 feet of water. And basically just throw this thing in the same places you would throw the crankbait and the football jig, but it's just a little bit more subtle approach, and it'll get some fish in the boat when the other baits won't. And when I'm throwing this bait, I'm usually throwing it on a 7'4" medium heavy action spinning rod with 10-pound fluorocarbon main line and a 30-pound braided line as my spool backing. And I really like this heavier line setup with this heavier rod because a lot of times I'm fishing the shaky head around shell beds or brush piles and stuff like that. And with this 10-pound fluorocarbon and the 30-pound braid, I can really pull those fish out of there. Also having that 7'4" medium heavy action rod also helps. So those are my top 3 baits when fishing offshore in muddy water. And I do fish a lot of other baits in that situation, like a flutter spoon, a big hollow body swim bait, a Carolina rig, a big 10-inch worm, and a lot of other lures. But these 3 baits will get the job done about 75% of the time, and the other baits are a little more niche, and I'll get into them in other videos. But as long as you have these 3 baits tied on and throw them in those muddy water conditions, you're gonna be putting a lot of good bass in the boat offshore. So guys, those are my top 3 baits for fishing offshore in muddy water. Hope this video helped you narrow down your bait selection for this summer when you're fishing offshore. And don't worry, I'll be making a full video on my top 3 baits for clear water fishing as well when I'm fishing offshore. And that video will be coming next week, so hopefully you guys will tune in for that one as well. And I'll see you next time. Hey guys, thanks for checking out the video. Hope you enjoyed, and if you want more content from Fish the Moment, check out my website, fishthemoment.com. On my website, I offer virtual fishing lessons you can do from your home using Google Hangout, on the water fishing lessons where you can go out in your boat and I can show you how to find fish with your electronics and on the water, and also lake breakdowns of some of those popular lakes around the country where I'll give spot recommendations, conditions, and lure recommendations as well. And if you really enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel in a more personal way, donate on my Patreon page. On Patreon, you can give a small monthly donation that helps me continue to make quality content for you guys into the future. And last but not least, check out my social media pages. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and I post a lot of great pictures, videos, and articles about bass fishing. So thanks again for checking out this video, and I'll see you in the next one.